Black judge shocks court by shaming racist lawyer career ends at gavel bang. The slam of the gavel echoed through the packed courtroom like a gunshot. Judge Marcus Wilson leaned forward, his weathered face creased with anger, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the suddenly silent room. In 35 years on this bench, I have never witnessed such a blatant display of prejudice and unprofessional conduct. Mr. Harrington, you will approach the bench. Now. The tall, silver-haired attorney froze, his confident smile faltering as whispers erupted around him. He straightened his expensive tie, glancing at his wealthy client who sat rigid with shock. Your Honor, I was merely stating the facts of the case as they approach. The bench. Each word fell like a stone. The courtroom held its collective breath as Harrington slowly walked forward. Court reporter Elaine Jenkins' fingers hovered above her stenotype machine. Bailiff Raymond Thompson shifted uncomfortably, his hand instinctively moving toward his holster. Judge Wilson's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow seemed louder than his previous command. What you just said isn't just grounds for a mistrial, Mr. Harrington. It's grounds for disbarment. And before this day is over, I promise you, the judge's eyes flicked toward the defendant, Maria Gonzalez, a 68-year-old grandmother who sat with tears streaming down her face, her daughter's protective arm around her shoulders. Your career will end with the bang of this gavel. But let's go back to how this all started. It was just 3 hours earlier when Judge Marcus Wilson arrived at the Franklin County Courthouse on what seemed like an ordinary Tuesday morning. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as Judge Marcus Wilson climbed them with practiced ease, nodding to the security guards who had known him for decades. At 67, Marcus moved more slowly than in his younger days, but he carried himself with the dignity that came from a lifetime of service to the law. Morning, Judge Wilson, called Frank, the head of courthouse security since the Reagan administration. Beautiful day, isn't it? Can't complain, Frank, Marcus replied, pausing to look up at the clear blue September sky. Reminds me of that summer of '76, the bicentennial. Remember those celebrations? Frank laughed. How could I forget? My wife still has those red, white, and blue dishes we bought. Marcus smiled, continuing through the metal detectors. His chambers felt like a second home after 20 years on the federal bench. The rich scent of leather-bound law books, the creaking of his old oak chair, these familiar sensations grounded him each morning before court began. His clerk, Megan Chen, was already at her desk, a steaming cup of coffee waiting for him. In her early 30s, Megan had worked with Marcus for 5 years and had become almost like a daughter to him after his own daughter moved to California. Good morning, Your Honor, she said, handing him a case file. The Gonzalez v. Westland Properties case is first on the docket today. Settlement talks broke down yesterday afternoon. Marcus frowned, taking a sip of coffee. Remind me of the details. Maria Gonzalez, 68 widow, being evicted from her apartment of 30 years by Westland Properties. They claim they need to renovate the building, but Mrs. Gonzalez's attorney argues it's because they want to convert to luxury condos and triple the rent. Ah, yes. The face of progress in our fair city, Marcus sighed. Who's representing Westland? Richard Harrington, Megan replied, her expression carefully neutral. Marcus set down his coffee cup with a bit more force than necessary. Harrington, of course. Richard Harrington was everything Marcus Wilson was not: flashy, outspoken, and notorious for representing wealthy clients against the little guy. At 65, Harrington had built a reputation as a ruthless litigator who won cases by any means necessary. Their paths had crossed many times over the decades, dating back to when both were young attorneys in the late 80s. His reputation precedes him, Megan said diplomatically. Indeed it does. Marcus straightened his bow tie, a habit from his early days as a lawyer when he'd emulated Thurgood Marshall. Well, the law is the law. Let's make sure justice is served today. In the courtroom, Maria Gonzalez sat beside her attorney, Lisa Santos, a public interest lawyer in her 40s who had dedicated her career to housing rights. Mrs. Gonzalez clutched a faded photograph in her gnarled hands, a picture of her late husband standing proudly in front of their apartment, building the day they moved in, back in 1989. Across the aisle, Richard Harrington conferred with James Westland, the third-generation owner of Westland Properties. Westland, in his 50s, wore an expression of impatient boredom, repeatedly checking his gold watch as if he had somewhere more important to be. All rise, called bailiff Raymond Thompson as Judge Wilson entered. The courtroom rose to its feet. Be seated, Marcus said, arranging his robes as he took his place behind the bench. We're here today in the matter of Gonzalez versus Westland Properties. Are both parties ready to proceed? Ready for the plaintiff, Your Honor, Lisa Santos said, standing. Ready for the defendant, Harrington replied smoothly, not bothering to rise fully from his chair. Marcus noted the subtle disrespect, but let it pass. Ms. Santos, you may begin. Lisa approached the podium, her manner straightforward and earnest. Your Honor, this case is about more than just a lease agreement. It's about a promise. When Maria Gonzalez and her late husband, Eduardo, signed their lease with Westland Properties 30 years ago, they were assured they could remain in their home as long as they paid their rent on time, which they have done without fail for 3 decades. As Lisa continued outlining the case, Marcus observed Maria Gonzalez. Her weathered face told the story of a life worked hard, the same kind of story his own mother had lived. His thoughts drifted briefly to his childhood home in Baltimore, where his mother had raised 3 children alone after his father died in Vietnam. Mrs. Gonzalez has nowhere else to go, Lisa was saying. The current rental market is 3 times what she pays now. On her fixed income from Social Security, she simply cannot afford to live anywhere else in this city, a city she has called home since immigrating legally from Guatemala in 1975. Richard Harrington leaned back in his chair, a slight smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. The gesture wasn't lost on Marcus, who had seen that same expression countless times over the years. Thank you, Miss Santos, Marcus said when she concluded. Mr. Harrington, your opening statement. Harrington rose languidly, buttoning his tailored suit jacket. Your Honor, this case is actually quite simple. Westland Properties has complied with all local housing regulations in issuing a notice to vacate. The building requires significant renovations to meet current safety codes, and those renovations cannot be completed with tenants in residence. He paced before the bench with the confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. While my opposing counsel has presented a very emotional appeal, the law is clear. The property belongs to my client, and he has the right to improve it as he sees fit. The lease agreement, which I've submitted as Exhibit A, clearly states that renovations constitute grounds for termination with proper notice, which was provided 6 months ago. Marcus leafed through the documents, scanning the relevant clauses. And these renovations are necessary for safety compliance? Absolutely, Harrington replied. The electrical system alone is dangerously outdated. We have reports from 3 separate inspectors confirming this. Marcus nodded. I see. Ms. Santos, your first witness. The plaintiff calls Maria Gonzalez to the stand. As Maria was sworn in, Marcus noticed how her hand trembled on the Bible. She was nervous, but there was dignity in her posture as she carefully arranged her simple floral dress after taking her seat. Mrs. Gonzalez, Lisa began gently, how long have you lived in apartment 3B at the Parkview building? 30 years and 4 months, Maria replied, her accent still present though she'd lived in America for decades. My Eduardo and I moved there when our daughter Carmen was just 7 years old. And in those 30 years, have you ever been late with your rent? Never, not once, Maria said proudly. Eduardo always said, pay the rent first, everything else second. Even when he got sick cancer 10 years ago, we paid the rent before the medical bills. As Maria continued her testimony, describing the community she had built in her neighborhood and her late husband's careful maintenance of their apartment, Marcus could see several jurors nodding in sympathy. Mrs. Gonzalez, Lisa asked, what will happen if you're forced to leave your home? Maria's eyes welled with tears. I don't know. My daughter Carmen lives in a 1-bedroom apartment with her husband and son. They don't have room. All my friends, my church, my doctor, everything is in walking distance now. I don't drive anymore. Where would I go? Thank you, Mrs. Gonzalez. No further questions. Mr. Harrington, your cross-examination, Marcus directed. Harrington approached with a predatory smile that made Marcus instantly alert. He'd seen that smile before, right before Harrington went for the jugular. Mrs. Gonzalez, he began smoothly, you've lived in this country for quite some time, correct? Yes, since 1975, almost 50 years. And in that time, you've come to understand how business works in America. Maria looked confused. I think so. So you understand that property owners have rights, that America is built on the principle of free enterprise, Lisa stood. Objection, Your Honor, argumentative. Sustained, Marcus ruled. Mr. Harrington, please stick to relevant questions. Harrington nodded, unperturbed. Mrs. Gonzalez, are you aware that your rent is significantly below market value? Yes, Mr. Westland's father, he told Eduardo we were good tenants, so he didn't raise the rent much over the years. He said good tenants were worth more than a few extra dollars. That was generous of him, Harrington said, his tone suggesting the opposite. But you realize that my client is not obligated to continue his father's charitable policies. Objection, Lisa called. Counsel is badgering the witness. Sustained, Marcus said sharply. Mr. Harrington, mind your tone. Harrington gave a small, insincere bow. Mrs. Gonzalez, have you made any attempt to find alternative housing? Maria nodded earnestly. Yes, my daughter and I looked at many places. Everything is too expensive now, or they have waiting lists years long for senior housing. But you did find some options, correct? Just not ones you preferred. The only place we found was in Millfield, 20 miles away. I would know no one there, and it's far from my doctor, my church. So there are options, Harrington interrupted. Just not convenient ones. Lisa was on her feet. Mr. Harrington, Marcus said sharply, but Harrington was on a roll now, his voice rising. Isn't it true that you believe your status should earn you privileges that other Americans don't receive? What status? Maria asked, bewildered and distressed. And then Harrington said it, the words that would change everything in the courtroom that day. Your status as an immigrant who doesn't fully understand or respect American property rights but expects our legal system to accommodate you anyway. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Maria's face crumpled in shock and hurt. Lisa Santos was on her feet, her face flushed with anger. Your Honor, I object in the strongest possible terms. Marcus felt a cold fury rise within him, a feeling he had spent decades learning to control in a profession and a country that had not always welcomed him. Mr. Harrington approached the bench, now. And that's where we came in, with Judge Marcus Wilson's gavel echoing through the suddenly silent courtroom, his voice carrying to every corner as he uttered those fateful words. In 35 years on this bench, I have never witnessed such a blatant display of prejudice and unprofessional conduct. With both attorneys now standing before him, Marcus switched off his microphone, leaning forward to speak privately. Mr. Harrington, your comment was xenophobic, prejudiced, and has no place in my courtroom or in any courtroom in this country. I'm declaring a mistrial and referring this matter to the State Bar Association for disciplinary action. Harrington's face reddened. Your Honor, that's an overreaction. I was merely pointing out, you were merely revealing your own biases, Counselor, Marcus interrupted, his voice deadly quiet. And I wonder if those same biases have influenced your client's decision to target Mrs. Gonzalez's building for renovation, when 6 other Westland properties in better neighborhoods have gone without updates for longer periods. Harrington's eyes widened slightly, and Marcus knew he'd hit home. You've researched my client's business? Harrington asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. I've done my homework, yes. Just as I've reviewed your history of representing landlords who mysteriously need to renovate only buildings in gentrifying areas with long-term rent-controlled tenants. Marcus looked directly into Harrington's eyes. This court may be bound by the law, Mr. Harrington, but it is not blind to patterns of behavior. Lisa Santos watched the exchange with growing realization. Your Honor, are you suggesting there's evidence of discriminatory housing practices? Marcus turned to her. I'm suggesting that this case may have implications beyond a simple eviction, Ms. Santos. I believe the Department of Housing might be very interested in reviewing Westland Properties' renovation history over the past decade. He switched his microphone back on. This court is in recess for 30 minutes. When we return, Mr. Harrington, I expect you to have a substantive settlement offer prepared for Ms. Santos and her client. One that allows Mrs. Gonzalez to remain in her home at her current rent rate for the remainder of her life, with any necessary safety renovations completed around her occupancy. Alternatively, we can proceed with a mistrial, and I will personally refer this matter to both the State Bar and federal housing authorities for investigation. The color drained from Harrington's face as he glanced back at James Westland, who was staring at the judge in disbelief. And Mr. Harrington, Marcus added, his voice carrying to the entire courtroom, you will issue a public apology to Mrs. Gonzalez before you leave this courtroom today. Am I understood? Yes, Your Honor, Harrington muttered. Court is in recess. The gavel fell. In his chambers, Marcus sat heavily in his chair, his hands slightly trembling with the aftermath of adrenaline. Megan entered quietly, closing the door behind her. That was something, Your Honor, she said. Marcus exhaled slowly. I may have overstepped, Megan. With all due respect, sir, no, you didn't. She sat across from him. But Harrington has friends on the Judicial Review Board. He's not going to take this lying down. Let him come, Marcus said, suddenly feeling every one of his 67 years. I've got maybe 3 years left before retirement. If standing up against that kind of prejudice is how I end my career, so be it. He reached for a framed photograph on his desk, himself as a young attorney in 1985, standing with Thurgood Marshall after a lecture the Supreme Court Justice had given. "Justice Marshall told me something that day," he said, nodding toward the picture. "He said, the law is powerful, but only if those wielding it have courage." Megan smiled. "You've never told me that story." "There's a lot I haven't told you," Marcus replied. "About what it was like coming up in the system in the 70s and 80s. The things I heard said right to my face in courtrooms not so different from this one." A knock at the door interrupted them. Bailiff Raymond Thompson entered, his expression troubled. "Judge Wilson, there's something you should know. James Westland is in the corridor making calls. I overheard him telling someone that the activist judge won't be a problem much longer." He mentioned calling in favors from a Senator Dixon. Marcus nodded slowly. "Thank you, Raymond." After the bailiff left, Megan looked alarmed. "Senator Dixon chairs the Judicial Oversight Committee." "I'm aware," Marcus said calmly. "James Westland's father played golf with half the state legislature. His donations have built hospital wings and university buildings. The Westland name carries weight." "So what will you do?" Marcus straightened his robe, a small, determined smile crossing his face. "The only thing I can do, Megan, my job." When court resumed, the gallery was even more packed than before. Word had spread quickly about the confrontation, and several local reporters had slipped into the back row. Marcus noted their presence without comment as he took his seat. "Are the parties ready to proceed?" he asked. Lisa Santos stood. "Yes, Your Honor, we've been presented with a settlement offer." "And?" Marcus prompted when she hesitated. "It's not acceptable, Your Honor." "Mr. Westland is offering Mrs. Gonzalez 6 months of paid rent at a different property, after which she would be on her own." Marcus turned to the defense table. "Mr. Harrington, I believe I made my expectations clear." Harrington rose, his earlier contrition replaced with renewed confidence. "Your Honor, my client feels that the settlement terms you suggested are unreasonable and constitute judicial overreach. We're prepared to accept a mistrial and address any subsequent investigations through appropriate channels." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Marcus wasn't surprised. Westland had made his calls, and Harrington now believed he had protection from higher up. "I see," Marcus said quietly. "In that case, Your Honor." James Westland himself suddenly stood, interrupting. "May I address the court directly?" Marcus raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Unusual but permitted." Westland buttoned his expensive suit jacket as he moved to stand beside his attorney. "Your Honor, I want to make it clear that I personally find Mr. Harrington's earlier comments reprehensible and not reflective of my company's values. Westland Properties was founded by my grandfather in 1947, and we have always prided ourselves on being fair landlords." Harrington looked at his client in shock, while Marcus kept his expression neutral. "That said," Westland continued, "this case is ultimately about business, not personal feelings. The Parkview building renovations are necessary for safety and modernization. We cannot make an exception for Mrs. Gonzalez, regardless of her circumstances." Marcus leaned forward. "Mr. Westland, are you aware that as recently as last month, you gave an interview to Business Monthly stating that Westland Properties plans to convert the Parkview building to luxury condominiums, selling for upwards of $500,000 each?" Westland blinked in surprise. "Ah, yes. That's the long-term plan after renovations." "So the necessary safety renovations are actually the first step in a conversion project that will net Westland Properties approximately $20 million in profit, based on the number of units and projected selling price. The market determines the value, Your Honor." "Indeed it does," Marcus agreed. "Just as the law determines what constitutes discriminatory housing practices." "Mr. Westland, are you aware that targeting buildings with elderly or immigrant tenants for renovation, when the actual intent is to force out rent-controlled occupants, could potentially violate federal housing laws?" Westland's confidence faltered. "That's not what we're doing." "No." Marcus picked up a folder from his bench. "I have here property records showing that Westland Properties owns 17 residential buildings in this city. The 3 buildings you've renovated in the past 5 years all had majority elderly or immigrant populations with long-term, below-market leases. Meanwhile, your properties in more affluent areas have gone without major updates for longer periods, despite some having documented safety concerns." The courtroom had gone completely silent. Even the reporters were leaning forward, straining to hear every word. "Your Honor," Harrington interjected, "this information wasn't submitted as evidence." "I'm not presenting it as evidence, Mr. Harrington. I'm explaining why I'm referring this matter to the Department of Housing and Urban Development for investigation into possible violations of the Fair Housing Act. As is my duty as an officer of the court when I become aware of potentially discriminatory practices. Marcus turned his attention back to Westland, whose face had gone pale. Mr. Westland, I strongly suggest you reconsider your settlement position. While you're certainly entitled to a mistrial today, I can assure you that the scrutiny that will follow will make this proceeding look like a friendly chat. The businessman swallowed hard, turning to whisper urgently to Harrington. After a heated exchange, Harrington addressed the court again. Your Honor, in the interest of resolving this matter expeditiously, my client would like to propose a revised settlement. Within the hour, a settlement was reached. Maria Gonzalez would be permitted to remain in her apartment for life at her current rent, with a legally binding agreement that any necessary safety renovations would be scheduled to minimize disruption to her daily life. Furthermore, Westland Properties would establish a fund to assist other elderly residents with relocation or rent subsidies if they chose to move during renovations. When the terms were read into the record, Maria Gonzalez wept openly, crossing herself and whispering "Gracias" repeatedly. Her daughter Carmen, who had joined her midway through the proceedings, held her mother's hand tightly, tears streaming down her own face. As required by Marcus's earlier order, Richard Harrington stood to deliver a public apology. Mrs. Gonzalez, he began stiffly, I apologize for my earlier comments, which were inappropriate and unprofessional. Marcus cleared his throat pointedly. Harrington's jaw tightened, but he continued. My words were prejudiced and disrespectful. They reflected biases that have no place in this courtroom or in our society. I sincerely apologize for the hurt I caused you. Maria nodded in acknowledgement, her expression one of dignity rather than triumph. Apology accepted, Mr. Harrington, she said simply. As the courtroom began to clear, Marcus noticed James Westland approaching Maria and Carmen Gonzalez. Curious, he watched as the property owner spoke briefly with the two women. Whatever he said caused Maria to reach out and pat his arm gently, a gesture of forgiveness that seemed to affect Westland deeply. Later that afternoon, as Marcus prepared to leave for the day, a knock came at his chamber door. To his surprise, Richard Harrington stood in the doorway. May I have a moment, Your Honor? The usual arrogance was gone from his voice. Marcus gestured to a chair. Come in, Richard. Harrington sat, looking uncomfortable. I wanted to speak with you off the record. We've known each other a long time, Marcus replied. Say what you need to say. What happened today? Harrington began, then paused, searching for words. It wasn't my finest hour. No, it wasn't. I've built my career on being aggressive, pushing boundaries. That's what clients like Westland expect, results by any means necessary. He sighed heavily. But today, when I heard myself say those things to Mrs. Gonzalez, I didn't recognize my own voice. Marcus remained silent, allowing the other man to continue. My father was a factory worker in Cleveland, Harrington said quietly. Did you know that? I never talk about it. He worked 60 hours a week so I could be the first in our family to go to college. He believed in the American dream that hard work and playing by the rules would be rewarded. A good principle, Marcus noted. Yes. And somewhere along the way I forgot it. Harrington looked directly at Marcus. After court, I called the State Bar Association myself. I've reported my own conduct and requested a formal review. Marcus couldn't hide his surprise. That's unexpected. I'm 65 years old, Marcus, too old to keep living a life I'm not proud of. Harrington stood to leave. I don't expect this changes anything between us. I just wanted you to know. As Harrington reached the door, Marcus spoke. Richard, the attorney turned. It takes courage to face yourself honestly. Your father would be proud of that, at least. A ghost of a smile crossed Harrington's face. Thank you, Your Honor. After Harrington left, Marcus sat alone in his chambers as evening shadows lengthened across the room. He thought about his own father, who never lived to see his son become a judge. About Maria Gonzalez, who would sleep in her own bed tonight, surrounded by 30 years of memories. About Richard Harrington confronting hard truths in the twilight of his career. The law was indeed powerful, Marcus reflected, but only when wielded with both courage and compassion. 6 months later, on a crisp spring morning, Marcus Wilson climbed the courthouse steps, moving a little slower these days but still carrying himself with the same dignity. Frank, the security guard, waved him through with a smile. Big day today, Judge Wilson? Marcus nodded. Indeed it is, Frank. In his chambers, Megan had coffee waiting, along with a copy of the morning newspaper. The headline read, Westland Properties announces new senior housing initiative. The article detailed how James Westland had partnered with the city to create affordable housing units reserved for seniors and low-income families, with current tenants of Westland buildings given priority. "Quite a turnaround," Megan observed. "People can surprise you," Marcus replied, adjusting his bow tie. "Everything ready for this morning?" "Yes, sir. The gallery is already full. Mrs. Gonzalez is there in the front row with her daughter and grandson." Marcus smiled. "Good, she should be there for this." When he entered the courtroom, everyone rose. Marcus took his place at the bench, looking out over the packed gallery. As Megan had said, Maria Gonzalez sat in the front row, dressed in her Sunday best, beaming proudly. "Be seated," Marcus said. "Today we gather for a special session of this court." He nodded to the bailiff, who opened a side door. Richard Harrington entered, but not in his usual place as counsel. Instead, he walked to the front of the courtroom where new attorneys were sworn in. "6 months ago," Marcus began, "this court witnessed an extraordinary sequence of events that reminded us all of the true purpose of our legal system, not merely to enforce the law, but to ensure justice. Today, we recognize the profound changes that have resulted." He turned to Harrington. Mr. Harrington, after voluntarily reporting his own misconduct to the State Bar, completed sensitivity training, pro bono service with immigrant communities, and has fundamentally restructured his practice to focus on elder law and tenant advocacy. The State Bar has reinstated his license in full, noting his exemplary commitment to professional redemption. Applause broke out in the courtroom. Harrington, looking both embarrassed and moved, nodded in acknowledgement. "Additionally," Marcus continued, "Westland Properties, under James Westland's leadership, has established a new corporate policy ensuring that all property renovations will include provisions for existing tenants, particularly the elderly and economically vulnerable. Their new senior housing initiative stands as a model for responsible development in our city." More applause, during which James Westland, seated in the second row, simply nodded respectfully toward Maria Gonzalez. "And finally," Marcus said, his voice warming, "I'm pleased to announce that Mrs. Maria Gonzalez has established the Eduardo Gonzalez Memorial Scholarship Fund, using a portion of the settlement funds to help first-generation immigrants pursue education in property law. The first recipient of that scholarship is here today, her own grandson, Miguel Gonzalez, who has been accepted to State University Law School for the fall term." The courtroom erupted in cheers as a young man stood, his grandmother beaming beside him. When the applause finally died down, Marcus spoke once more. "The law at its best is not static, but evolving, shaped by the courage and compassion of those who interact with it. What happened in this courtroom 6 months ago could have ended many ways. That it ended with growth and reconciliation rather than bitterness speaks to the character of everyone involved." He looked directly at Maria Gonzalez. "It is my honor to announce that the City Council has unanimously voted to designate Mrs. Gonzalez's building as a historic landmark, ensuring that it will be preserved for future generations as a symbol of our community's commitment to protecting its most vulnerable members." As a final round of applause filled the courtroom, Marcus Wilson felt a profound sense of fulfillment. In a career spanning nearly 4 decades, he had seen the law used as both sword and shield. But on this day, it had served its highest purpose as a bridge, connecting people across divides of age, culture, and understanding. "This court is adjourned," he said, bringing down his gavel one last time. "Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments."